Hi, I'm Christina with Tinagirl Life. Today we're going to make my favorite Finnish food of all times. I grew up with this. We had them Christmas morning. We had them on special occasions. They're called Riisipiirakkas. That's what we call them. They're also called Karjalanpiirakkas, or if you're an English-speaking person and you're making them, you might call them Karelian pies. Or if you're my nephew Thomas, you'll call them Riisipiirakkas. So I grew up in a Finnish-Swedish home, finlandssvensk. My mom is Finnish, she's from Kuusamo, and my dad is Swedish and he's from Stockholm. And they married and moved to Canada and had me and my brother. And so we grew up in this great mix of Finnish-Swedish culture, and my mom, being the primary cook, cooked lots of Finnish food, and this is one of the things that she makes all the time, and I really love it. It's easy to make. You probably have the ingredients in your house. If you don't, they're easy to get, and this is a pretty easy thing to make once you watch a video or something and understand how to form it. So I'm going to show you that today. Today we're going to get started making the filling because that needs to cool while we make the dough. So let's get started. So I've used all different kinds of rice to make my riisipiirakkas. This rice here though that I find at my grocery store, it's an Italian rice actually. It's kind of got a little bit of a rounder shape to it. I find that rice to be the best rice for making any kind of rice porridge. The way that it reacts to the milk and absorbs the milk, it just makes such a nice porridge. So we're going to start with a cup of this rice and 2 cups of water. So we're bringing 1 cup of rice, or 250 mils of rice, to 2 cups of water, which is a standard recipe. That would be 500 mils of water. That's a standard rice recipe. So we're going to bring it to a state where it's absorbed the water and it's ready to absorb our milk. Now I've set my timer, and so that'll give us an idea of how long this is actually going to take to make the porridge. We're starting with the porridge so that it has time to cool, like I said, while we're making our dough. Now this kind of rice I find easily sticks to the bottom of the pan. Normally when you make rice, you put the lid on and you don't touch it. With this, I find I want to move this rice around a little bit. It's okay to do so. Just keep it from sticking to the bottom, especially once you add the milk. Okay, we've reached the point now where the water is almost fully absorbed. And I'm going to start adding my milk. So we're going to be adding a liter of milk, so 4 cups of milk to this. And I'll do it 2 cups at a time or so. Start with that. So you don't want to leave this at this point. You want to be watching this, making sure that it's not scorching on the bottom. Milk and this kind of rice really soften up quickly, and it will stick to the bottom. You don't want that. It'll flavor the rice in a way that you don't want it to be flavored, with a burnt taste. So this kind of rice is the rice that Italians would use, or anybody would use, to make risotto. So we're about 11 minutes into making our rice porridge from the very start. I just added just over a cup of milk to our rice and water mixture. As you can see, it's not coming together just yet. This is going to change quite a bit over the next few minutes. You'll really want to watch the bottom of this pot at this time. I can already feel kind of a texture at the bottom where the milk wants to stick. So I can turn my temperature down a bit, but I definitely want to keep this cooking. So don't walk away from this pot at this point. Just keep stirring it until it's done. It won't take that much longer. We're going to add half a teaspoon of salt to this mixture. It's been boiling now for 18 minutes, and I still have just under 2 cups of milk to add to this, but we're going to continue stirring this until it gets creamier and creamier.
You can still see that it's very much just milk and rice. The rice is absorbing the milk, but in a few minutes you'll see how it all becomes very creamy and pudding-like. But it won't look like this. So we're just over 20 minutes into our cooking process, and I'm going to add the last of the milk. See, even with me stirring the whole time, I'm just going to tilt this forward, you can see that it's wanting to burn on the bottom here. So you need to be very careful with your heat. Turn it down a bit. I don't want to mix that brown into my rice porridge. And in fact, I might just switch pots at this point because I don't want that in my porridge. We'll see how it goes. So I did end up switching pots actually, and just really watching my temperatures so I don't burn my rice at the bottom. The burnt part at the bottom there was fine. It didn't ruin my porridge, but it could. So definitely watch it, stir it. And I was stirring the whole time, so that just shows you how important it is to work on your temperature, kind of medium-high to keep it boiling, but definitely keep stirring to keep it off the bottom. Okay, we're almost 30 minutes into cooking. As you can see, the milk is actually starting to look thicker, so that's the rice breaking down. And so it's starting to come together really quickly here. I'm stirring. I've been stirring the whole time since we added the milk at about the 10-minute mark. And I'm trying to keep it from burning at the bottom, but trying to keep the heat up enough to keep it sort of cooking and boiling faster here. Still is not where I want it to be, and you'll see that in a few minutes how it'll change. Okay, so we are almost at 35 minutes of cooking. You can see how this is completely changed now. The rice has become like a pudding. So I'm going to actually take it off the heat at this point, because as it cools, it's going to continue to thicken. And I actually don't want it to be so thick that I can't work with it by the time I've made my, my dough. So I'm going to turn this off and we're ready to move on to the next step. Okay, so while our rice porridge is cooling on the stove, and every once in a while I'm giving it a little stir so that we don't get like a skin on top of it, we're going to quickly make our dough so we'll be ready to make our riisipiirakkas. Okay, so I have a stand mixer. If you don't have one, you can do this by hand. This is much easier, but not everybody has one. So, okay. So we're going to start with 2 cups of rye flour. Now use the dark rye flour. I recently ran out of dark rye and I used a light rye, and I think it was a mistake. It just didn't, the dough just didn't have that nice texture to it. And then we're going to add 2 cups of white flour. So the light rye uses the inside of the kernel, which doesn't have very much texture to it. So it's kind of like using a white flour almost. Whereas the dark rye uses like the husk of the kernel. And so you'll have a little more texture to your dough. Then we're going to add a little bit of salt to this. I'm just going to mix this around a bit. And then we're going to add our water. So we're going to add the water kind of slowly. We're not going to dump it all in at once. So we're adding about 1 cup of water. And what we're wanting to see is for the dough to pull away from the sides of the bowl. Okay, that dough is perfect. We're ready to get started. Okay, we're ready to go. So I've cut this into 2 pieces, and I'm gonna just cover the other piece with a damp tea towel just to keep it moist. So this recipe makes this recipe actually makes 20 lunch-size riisipiirakkas, meaning that, you know, you have one for lunch and it's good enough. But if you were making them for appies at a party, you might get 25 or 30 out of them. So I'm just going to cut it, this one, into, it's quite a stiff dough. So I need to make 5 out of this side here. So try to roll it maybe into kind of an even little log so that you can cut it. So you get similar sizes for each. Okay, feels a bit small. So the reason that you make the porridge first and then make the dough after is that what'll happen is if you make the dough and let it sit, it kind of can get a skin on it, and the texture of it isn't quite as nice. So I kind of press it with my fingers just to make sort of a circle. Make sure you have some flour. Incidentally, I've got my oven going. It is set for 485 degrees, so almost 500 degrees. My mom's recipe says 500, but we always grew up with older stoves in our house, and I find with my newer stove that it's just far too hot, so 485 is good. And I have a French rolling pin. You can buy these online. I'll put a link to a rolling pin like this in my description below. I love this because it makes it so easy to make a shape that you want. Because of the tapered ends and the wider middle, you can kind of roll, you have a lot of control. It's hard to explain until you use one, but it's quite a nice rolling pin to use. All right, so I'm trying to make an oval here. My first one's turning out a little wonky. That's okay, the first ones always do. And I'm rolling it out to about 1/8 of an inch thick. Now I'm using my porridge here. My porridge is probably, I can still see a little bit of steam coming off of it. I like working with it warm because I find that it's easier to work with, because as it cools it gets thicker, it continues to thicken up. Okay, and then what you're going to do with your oval is you're going to fold over the sides and you're going to pinch, 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 and you end up with a piirakka. Okay, so I'm putting them on parchment paper. Last time I didn't use parchment paper and mine ended up sticking to the pan, and it was a little bit of a disaster, so use parchment. I'm not sure if you could use a silpat or something like that. It depends on how high a temperature a silpat can actually endure in your oven. So make sure you check on that before you go ahead and use that. This piece of dough was a little bit bigger. See, when my aunt makes these, hers are perfect. Every single one is exactly the same size. And you know, it's amazing. Like, you'll go to her house and she'll have 100 of them out on a tray and they all look exactly the same. Mine won't be like that. My mom used to do something fun all the time for me, where she would make one really big one for me. So when I got home from school, there was a nice, like, double size Riisipiirakka for me. I always loved that. Okay, and again, we flip the sides up and we give it a little pinch. This one's a bit thicker. I had a little more dough on this one. So I'm actually going to put this one on a different tray in case I end up with some more that are a bit bigger, so they have the same cooking time. Okay, I'm down to my last two here. So my husband and I travel quite a bit, and the only thing I've ever seen in the world that I've seen that's similar to Riisipiirakka is something we saw in Turkey called a pide, P-I-D-E. And it doesn't really taste the same, but it has the same idea of having a dough with a filling inside that kind of looks like this. I'll see if I can find a picture and I'll post it right here for you of what a pide looks like. So as you can see, I'm almost done with the porridge. I've literally got 2 balls of dough left, and my oven has been heating while I've been making these. It's almost at 500 degrees, and we are ready to start baking. So they take about 8 minutes in the oven. If you don't have a oven thermometer, if you have an older oven, you might want to invest in an oven thermometer just so that you can end up with knowing what the right temperature is that you have in your stove, because that makes a big difference too. You don't want to burn these after all this work. Just giving the ends a little pinch before they go into the oven, because as they sit here they kind of might separate, and I don't want the porridge to pour out of them. Okay, so the first batch is in the oven. I've put them in the center rack. When you're baking something at 500 degrees or close to 500, you want to make sure you're working right in the middle of your oven. Don't be tempted, even if you have convection, to put multiple layers in, because I've found that the bottom layer burns. So it's just too hot. So just do them one at a time. They only go in for 8 minutes, which reminds me to set my timer. And there we go. We'll see what they look like when they come out. Oh, I gotta prepare the last part, which is the water and butter bath. Okay, so the next step. What I've done here is I've taken about 1/4 cup of butter and put it into boiling water. And what we're going to do is we're just going to give each one of these a little butter bath. Just flip it over, dip it in, and then we're going to put it into a covered container with a lid. I can hear them sizzling. It just kind of coats them in a little bit of butter, and but not too much butter. These look pretty good. So I would call these lunch size. So they're a savory type of thing. They're not a sweet thing. As you notice, we put salt into them, and it's such a really nice comfort food. Okay, they are done and they look great. I ended up with about 21 of them. Hey, thanks for joining me today on Tinagirl Life. I hope you enjoyed making Riisipiirakkas with me. And if you did, could you please give my video a thumbs up? And if you wouldn't mind hitting that subscribe button and that bell, and that way you won't miss out on any of my upcoming videos. I will see you next time.